Okay, well, welcome everyone. My name is John Coonrod. I'm chair of MCLD here in the US. We are now a network of national associations, and I happen to chair this one here in the US. And it's great to see so many of my friends and colleagues joining from all over the world. I'm particularly excited about today's session. We have two really wonderful speakers who I met at the United Nations during the high-level political forum, and I think they are going to really help us educate ourselves today. So I will, as usual, give a brief overview of the movement, and then we'll hear from Sofjan and from Reynald Maeda, who will both be addressing kind of the same issue. Can communities rescue the Sustainable Development Goals? That is a very big issue right now. So click. So the movement for community-led development was launched at the first SDG summit in September of 2015. So almost exactly 8 years ago. We have more than 1,500 civil society organizations that are members across about 40 countries. We've had core support from the Hunger Project, although this year is a transition year in which we'll continue with that support, but more and more organizations are funding the movement. And this is an exciting time. We are growing, we're expanding, and we're transforming to be a true majority world-led organization. 17 countries have formed national associations. Of those, 7 have full legal registration and can legally raise money and spend money. The goals are based on the recognition that development is local. And as you'll hear today, the world is really waking up to that fact. Our commitments have been to ensure voice, agency for women, youth, people with disabilities, and really all marginalized groups, because the only way to ensure that no one is left behind, the mantra of the SDGs, is to ensure that everyone has a voice, and hopefully a collective voice. Second, that communities have a fair share of the public budget. We're saying that's at least 20% of the public budget, and that there are mechanisms in place for community-based organizations to be able to generate funding. Third, local government needs to be democratic, responsive, effective, transparent. And if you get those 3 things, you can pretty much guarantee that you can achieve quality public services, which is a fundamental human right. Finally, the biggest challenge of all is to really build the resilience of communities, because resilience to shocks is a community level attribute. There's no such thing as a resilient country or a resilient household. It's always community actors who are the first responders to every crisis, every shock. And so that is something that needs to be invested in and supported. As a movement, our colleagues have been generating wonderful new frameworks to facilitate and strengthen the practice of community-led development. We have a school for community-led development. It began in Mexico, is now operating in Kenya, and hopefully this curriculum will go everywhere. There have been wonderful courses that Anne has gotten together on community fundraising and network weaving and other subjects. Community monitoring evaluation is coming up, and a whole program of mutual capacity strengthening. Our national associations are using a tool in many local languages to assess the quality of community-led development, a self-assessment, a participatory assessment. We are linking up the donor agencies like USAID to actually meet with and hear the voices of community-based organizations. Here, you can kind of recognize the USAID people in Kenya, meeting with community-based organizations there. And then associations have carried out massive campaigns during COVID. They carried out massive campaigns, particularly to ensure people know the facts and the disinformation is halted. We've had some very successful prevention of violence campaigns in Sierra Leone and in Nigeria that really have measurably reduced violence and saved lives. So that and many other campaigns are underway, and we really encourage everybody who can to join us in the movement. Now, where are we in the world? We are at halftime in the Sustainable Development Goals. And keep calm, it's halftime. There was a sense of failure and panic at the United Nations. I've never heard people at the UN before say, we're in trouble. However, they are also turning to using sports analogies, and they're saying, hey, you know, every race, every game is always won in the second half. They use this quote, how you respond to the challenge in the second half will determine what you become after the game. So this theme of really recommitting ourselves for the second half of the SDGs is going to be a big theme for the rest of the year and the upcoming SDG summit. There'll be, in September, there will be this big SDG summit, and it'll have not only diplomatic activities, there will be rock and roll concerts, there will be all sorts of things really to get people up for it the second half. And I have to say there's evidence to support this approach. The MDGs got off to a very slow start in the year 2000. And it really wasn't until 2010 that you could start to see a real action happening on the MDGs. And in those final 5 years, it was the countries of Africa that were the fastest progressing countries on Earth. So this could happen again, and we shall see. So the Secretary General has released a report, and this is his theory of change for what needs to be done around energy, biodiversity, education, 6 different subjects plus one cross-country issue of halting violence against women. That is what he sees needs urgent focus. And he sees 5 enablers in his strategy, of which localization is one of those 5. And in fact, at this session, there was just lots and lots and lots going on around localization, and particularly focusing on 2 of the SDGs, SDG 11, which is sustainable cities and communities. There were lots of mayors, lots of county governors there, district governors there. There were probably 300 local leaders there. There were 200 communities that had done their own local reporting, and we're going to hear about that process today. So it's not just national reporting at these meetings now, it's really hearing from the cities, the counties, and districts. And also Goal 16, that includes goals for participatory decision-making and responsive government at every level, starting from the community level. So those are a couple of bricks that we can build on. This was the high-level political forum. It was indeed high level. There were pretty much every country was participating. Here you see in the blue our first guest speaker today, Sri Sofjan, and I'm going to stop showing my slides, and she can turn on her camera and present to us, because I was very inspired by her participation. She's from the Huairou Commission, which is a huge network launched after the Beijing Women's Conference of grassroots women's organizations. And so welcome, Sri, and I turn it over to you.
Thank you very much. A very good morning. I hope you can hear me well. Thank you to John for inviting me, and for the movement for community-led development for this space this morning. I hope I will be able to share some of my observation, experience working with local grassroots women. Just to introduce myself, my full name is Sri Sofjan. I'm a Malaysian, usually based in Malaysia, but the Huairou Commission, which is a member-led grassroots women organization with over 100 members, 100 member organization in 40 countries around the world, is based, their secretariat is based in Brooklyn, New York. So I'm currently in New York, so at the same time zone as John and the secretariat of the movement for a community-led organization. Just to give you a quick introduction, the Huairou Commission started or founded in 1995. So we are 20 more older than your movement, John. We were founded during the 4th Women Conference in Beijing, China. And if you wonder why our name is Huairou, which is actually the name of a town in China, is because during that conference, civil society groups were put in a place called Huairou, which is 30 miles away from Beijing, so that, you know, these civil society voices do not disturb the legislative process of the conference. So you know how they try to put us somewhere, you know, and sometimes we still feel that way, yeah? Or there is still, you know, we don't get the space, the seat at the table properly. So Huairou Commission represent nearly 1 million women from rural, urban, and indigenous community. Our members are network, cooperatives, federation of self-help groups, and women-led based organization. I see one of our member leader, Qazi from Bangladesh, is actually here and part of your movement, yeah? The Huairou Commission vision is to lead a transformative agenda for inclusive, resilient, and gender justice, where member groups are building the leadership capacity of grassroots women, enhancing the resilience of their communities, and advocating for change in the system that govern development, planning, and finance. Now, this morning, you have a very interesting topic of discussion: how communities can rescue the SDG. And just because we were talking about the SDG, the Sustainable Development Goals just last week at the HLPF, and assessing the achievement, which, you know, John shared just now, that there is some sort of realization and panic to some extent that we are not going to achieve the goal. Yeah, one of the reasons is that other than, you know, the real political will, is also because we had the pandemic. Yeah, but you also mentioned, John, that during the pandemic and when there is a crisis, it's the community that are the forefront. Now, where are we, you know, in this whole development discussion and the whole policy design, the whole program design, yeah? And where are the resources? Who control the resources? So let's, I'm just want to, bring that up before I go into the details. I'll just go quickly. I'm sure most of you already understand and know what is sustainability, but I just want to, remind all of us that sustainability is a broadly used term to indicate program, initiative, action that aim to preserve a certain or a particular resource. And for me, sustainability, when we talk about sustainability, and I think this is what the community sees, is that sustainability should always refer to 4 distinct areas: the human, the people, the social, where we live, the economic part of it, where we to sustain ourselves, and the environment, the ecology, what give us the resources for the economic improvement, for the social improvement, and for us, the human being, and sustainability, the natural or the mainstream way of measuring development before was the GNP, was the GDP, right, in countries, which is numbers, which is more focused on the economy. But the quality of growth is what matters, actually. Yeah. So so then, with all this localization, with all this discussion about focusing on sustainability, when the government lead, the government, because the member state, we must remember that the Sustainable Development Goals was adopted and endorsed by all the UN member states. That means they are supposed to, take it into policy and implement it. Now, you implement at the national level, but in the first few years, they realize that only at the national level it will not happen. It has to be localized. So now the buzzword in the halftime is localization, right? So when we talk about localization, localization for them, or for the people who use this buzzword, localizing is the process of taking into account subnational context in the achievement of the 2030 agenda, the 17 goals and its 169 targets. And from setting the goals and targets to determining the means of implementation and using indicators to measure and monitor the progress. And the SDG was said to also provide a framework for local development policy and on how local and regional government can support the achievement of the SDG through action from the bottom up. Yeah, you're always talking about the bottom up. Yeah, but where are the communities when you're talking about bottom up? Are we at the seat? Are we having a seat at the table? Or are we just being a checkbox tick? When they say participation of the communities, participation of the stakeholders. Yeah. And participation means, oh, here's the plan. Can you endorse this? Oh, the community endorsed it. They participated. They have engaged. But do you, or do we have a say in saying that, oh, that plan, that particular building shouldn't be there. It should be a playground. It was an empty space where the kids could play football. But now it has been taken over by a private sector to build high-rise building to generate the economy, But where do we balance generating the economy and the quality of life of the people. And that's the part of what we want to also make sure about the human sustainability, relating it to the social sustainability, the environment, and also the economy. Yeah. So I'm sharing what the Huairou Commission, as a woman-led organization supporting grassroots on the ground, how do we, work together to make sure that community gets a seat? So we make sure that we need to, the theory of change that we employ is to center stage community development through collective power. So it's not a person, me as a person, you, John, as a person, asking, oh, we need this, we need that. It's about organizing at the grassroots level, at the community level. So when we organize, and I'm sure that most members of your organization are actually organized group. When we organize, we have a collective power. We can bargain, we can work together. Yeah, so that's the I think the essence, that how we must change if we have not done that, and how we need to empower our community leaders, the people at the community level. So I'm also sharing this pathway for change that we use at Huairou Commission. First is to strengthen grassroots group, in terms of their organizing and leadership. So organizing is not something that we do at one time. Organizing is continuous. But if you talk to your funders, they don't see this as a process that needs to be resourced. To ensure sustainability of leadership, we don't want one leader, we want many leaders. So we have to always do this, organizing, giving different roles of leadership to different leaders, so that the leadership at the community level grows with different individuals taking the role of representation, not individual, representation of the interests of their community. Now, the second part is about nurturing their knowledge and good practices to promote here, based on Huairou Commission, is of course gender, just and resilient development. But in general, is resilient development, sustainable development. Yeah, we cannot deny that most solutions are at the community level. But we also need to give them seed funding to also get them to do these things, to come up with solution, to expand the solution, to test the solution, and then they have the knowledge. And with that knowledge, they can do peer learning. So peer learning, learning from each other, is not only for the graduates, it's not only for the officials. We need to put money, put resources to also give grassroots, community level, the opportunity to learn from each other. You have the School for Community Development, and that's great. That's one part of it. But then from there, you need to also link with the others for them to exchange what they know and get inspired by each other and find solution with each other. We also need to build, the third part of our pathway for change is to build constituencies and network. Here, you already have a network, but you need to also network with others, build alliances with others. So first we build our own constituency. For Huairou Commission is about grassroots women constituencies. We also partner with other big network of grassroots organization. For example, the Slum Dwellers International, or better known as SDI, because of our gender focus. We go, Women in Informal Employment, Organizing Together, we go, which is also a grassroots women big network on supporting women working in informal sector. But we also build network and alliances with UCLG, United Cities and Local Government. So the building of constituencies and network is lateral and also vertical. Yeah. I think most of you have heard this, so I'm sorry if I'm repeating this. And then, we must make sure that we influence and change public policy and processes at the local level, regional level, and international level. And that's why organizations like you, like us, Huairou Commission, like SDI, use some of our resources to also go to this international meeting. And at this international meeting, it's very important to actually have resources to bring the grassroots themselves to speak. What we find is that there's no investment in bringing grassroots communities to speak. At this HLPF recently, almost no scholarship, almost no. And if you look, John, and others who participated in the HLPF, how many sessions, high-level session, official session, that has actually the grassroots or community representative or constituent representative from the local level, from the real community level, speaking at the official session. We have some, at the side events, and many organize themselves and put their resources there. Yeah, but we are not really at the sitting and having a seat at the table yet. We see that local government, because they organize as a big constituencies, they are trying and now get recognition. Maybe this is one of the things that we should work together, is having a community day at the UN. Because the local and regional government has a community day, community forum, local and regional government forum, local and regional government day. Can we do that? So civil society or community is always put under the civil society. We are lumped with the civil society, but we are actually have different constituent and interest and representation of real groups on the ground that do everyday solution. So influencing and changing public policy and process is a critical pathway for change, and we should not, forgo that. And one of the ways is to actually get our representation elected, appointed into the seat that get this, that do this thing, representation in expert group meeting. That's the buzzword for the UN. Whenever they're going to have a big conference, they have the expert group meeting. And expert group meeting, 90% are government professionals, but not the community, not the representation from real constituent group who are struggling, who come up with solution. So, this is something that, for the Summit of the Future, this is something that we want to make sure that it's in the agenda, that grassroots as a constituent get recognized. Yeah. So this is what the Huairou Commission call our empowerment tree. We need to empower our leaders. We need to empower, the people at the grassroots level. And we use different strategy, different methodology, different tools that we have developed that the grassroots women themselves have developed over time with the over 20 years of our own history. Yeah, we have what we call the local to local dialogue. We have the monitoring groups on the ground. I mentioned about peer exchange is an important tool. We have the mapping, community mapping. You know, the community mapping that is one tool that actually can also contribute into the data gathering for the SDGs. John asked me to speak about SDG 11, which is actually one of the SDGs that actually touch our life daily. Yeah, and the targets and the goals are all very much part of our daily life. But they mention, or they, in their assessment, they have not achieved this. They are very much behind it. I'm not going to read all this because you can find what it is on the net, and I can also share this presentation. But Goal 11 progress, this is from the SDG report. Yeah, hardly achieve much, you know, and so they, you know, the group or the UN Habitat, you know, mentioned about rescuing SDG 11 is possible through transformative action that depart from the status quo, that depart from business as usual responses. And it lists 4 points. Do you see anything about community there? Do you see a recognition that, you know, it is so lofty? It is so lofty. It is so up in the sky for me. And they're talking about localization. And there is a local 2030 coalition, which actually have the space for grassroots and communities to share their practices, their achievement. And we need to use that space. Yeah. But how much information, how much knowledge from that page is then used to actually create partnership? Because for us, localization should be about partnership between the government, who has the mandate from the UN and so on, and the mandate from the people that elect them, you know, to partner with the community that they represent. And government, so let's talk about governance as well, because governance is not government. Governance is government, civil society, and the private sector. And good governance is in the middle where they work together. Yeah, so when we were talking about, John mentioned about the MDGs, Millennium Development Goals. During that time, the word or the buzzword was good governance. Nowadays, we hardly hear about good governance. We hardly hear about what are the characteristics of good governance that would propel the rescuing of the SDGs. I'm not giving you answers. As you see, let's think together. So for me, rather than how will community, you know, whether we can rescue the SDG, my question is, will communities be recognized and resourced for their contribution and leadership and roles in implementing the SDGs? Will we have a seat at the table? It's in our hands. It's about working together. And I just want to also share with you, this 5-point vision is a vision that was developed by a project of the UN 30 years ago. And I think it is still valid today. So for us to achieve sustainable development goal, we have to be socially just, that the benefit of the economic development must be shared equally by all sectors of society, including, women, children, the physically challenged, and the marginalized group. We need to make sure ecological sustainability, political participatory, participation of all sectors in development and in governance of the activities. Governance means having a seat at the table, having a voice to make decision. I mean, not a voice, but I would say representation of the constituency, your constituency. And then, of course, we want our economy to be productive, and we must not forget about culture, cultural vibrancy that actually, support all this, and having a respect for cultural vibrancy and diversity is the key for peace that ensures sustainability. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Shri. It's just this, you've put our struggle in this bigger picture, and I really appreciate your doing that. It's, we're part of a big movement of organizations, networks, and most importantly, the people themselves. So I really, really appreciate your leadership, and I really appreciate everything you brought to us today. Before we turn to Reynald, I want to see if anyone has any questions or comments before the next part of the call. Anyone?
I wonder, Evans has made several interesting comments and questions in the chat. Evans, I wondered if you wanted to articulate any of those, and thank you so much. Incredible presentation, by the way.
Thank you so much. I thought I was called. Was I?
Yeah, you had put comments in the chat and we want to hear them out loud.
Yes, basically what actually, kind of saying here is there was a transition from the MDGs, the Millennium Development Goals, before they were understood by the people. And now we are talking about the SDGs, which are also facing the same challenges of domestication in our environments. And I know that in Tanzania, we have the UN SDGs organization, which is led by my young brother, Maeda. Now, I'm just asking, where is there a place in the Global South, all countries represented here, where the SDGs have started to realize some domestication?
That's a great question and a great lead into the next speaker, because it was really striking that the process for local input, local measurement, local reporting has finally taken off. And in fact, I will jump to I'll share a slide again. Share screen, share. No audio. So if you Google voluntary local reviews, which are the counterpart of the voluntary national reviews done by communities, you'll see there's this drop down with all of these countries. You can look up Tanzania and you can see the very first voluntary local review from the city of Mwanza in Tanzania. It's for Tanzania's first voluntary local review. When the SDG process began, there were very few of these. And however, there's been a big campaign, particularly by UCLG, among other networks, and mayors associations, etc. Because some of like the US government has been on again, off again about even being able to say the word SDGs. But cities like San Jose and Los Angeles and New York City have been very active with the SDGs. They've been, and even smaller communities have taken on this framework. I know in the Hunger Project, the Union Parishads in Bangladesh and the epicenters in Africa have done their own SDG frameworks. So it is one of the ways that we can achieve some of the goals that Sri was talking about, really demanding a place at the table. One place at the table is through this voluntary national review process. And the first one ever from Tanzania is this one. They did a beautiful graphic design of it, which these days can be done very inexpensively on a laptop. But it takes a lot of work and a lot of communication with all the stakeholders. So, and it has an impact not only with policymakers, but with the members of the community themselves, to see their progress, their voices, their priorities reflected and carried up all the way to the United Nations. So one of the speakers on this subject, as Evans just said, his little brother, Maeda, Reynald is now our next speaker. I'm going to stop sharing and let me find him on this board. Yes, there he is. So I'm going to pin him. Oh, there you are. So Reynald, tell us about creating the very first voluntary local review of Tanzania. And I remember you're saying there were a lot of challenges and it took a lot of work, but also what kind of positive impact did it have on the people of Mwanza?
Thank you, John. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Sri, for your very comprehensive presentation. So I'll share our practical experiences in participating in the Mwanza VLR. Just for brief introduction, I'm Reynald Maeda. I'm the Executive Director of the UN Association here in Tanzania. UN associations are global movements, for those who don't know, for people's, are global people's movements for the United Nations. We're sort of the NGO affiliated part of the UN, of the United Nations, totally independent. Here in Tanzania, we convene the Tanzania Sustainable Development Platform. It's sort of these advisory bodies for SDGs. So they are non-state actors advisory bodies for the SDGs. There are several in Africa that I know of and that we work with, but we are convening the Tanzanian platform. We work previously before this year, we participated in the national reviews. So VNRs, Tanzania has also presented its second VNR this year. And in 2019 and this year, we convened non-state actors, civil society to contribute to the national report, but also produce a separate civil society report. It's something that we also did this year. So we have the overall national report, but we also have a civil society report. Coming to Mwanza, there were very interesting questions that John and Sri both raised in the beginning. Is where are the communities? The buzzword during this high-level political forum was localization. I was also surprised, in a good way, by the number of side events and events all dedicated to localizations of SDGs in countries. And it's again halfway to 2030. And we're still talking localization. This is something I always say should have happened back in 2016, 2015, because in reality, SDGs happen in communities. So my experience, our experience in the Mwanza is that, Mwanza, this is Tanzania's first ever voluntary local review, and it happened in the city of Mwanza. And also it has a unique arrangement because it's a twinning VLR. So the Mwanza city is friendship city with the Finnish city of Tampere. So they've had this friendship cooperation since 1988. And just the VLR kind of revitalized this partnership. And we partnered with the city of Mwanza, the city of Tampere, UN Habitat, and the UN Association of Tanzania and Finland. Now, when we got in, we were to use the UN Habitat's urban monitoring framework, which is widely used in these VLRs. And I think for us, when we got in, our question was, where are the communities in this? Because for us, VLRs, to make them meaningful, you need to have community voices. If it's just the stakeholders and the local government and the authorities and the private sectors in the locality, then we have a VNR for that. It's a document that is highly high level, and there's very little community voices in those. So for us, what we wanted to influence in this process was to ensure that communities participate in this exercise, because it's a local review. The scale is not too big to make to say that, okay, we cannot have community engagement because it's a VNR, it's big, it's a whole country. We have 186 municipalities in Tanzania, and some countries have more municipalities. So this is where we came in. And if you look, and I agree with the previous speaker's concerns, if you look at the urban monitoring framework, there's very little guidance on how to engage communities in these exercises. So there's VLRs, there's now VSRs, which also do not have guidance on how to engage communities. So you have the voluntary local reviews, and you have the subnational voluntary local reviews, which are stepped, down to this should be like more community engaging. But if you look at them, there's also very little guidance on how to engage actual communities, how to talk to people in these assessments. Anyways, back to the VNRs, the challenges were VLR in Mwanza. The challenge for us was, how do we influence to get these communities, the ones that you see in the picture, into the exercise? So we supported community engagement for this VNR. So by developing tools that were simple enough for the people to understand. I mean, if you have these big data collection tools, they have the indicator language people don't understand. So for what we did was to, and I'm happy I heard that you also have a community engagement tool, is to ask communities questions that they can relate to. Things like how easy is for you to send your child to school? What is the challenge? What are the challenges for you in accessing, healthcare? How expensive is it for you to get food? So these kinds of questions are the ones that we helped communities to discuss and then be translated into, the high-level indicators and targets into the documents. But for us, that was how we wanted communities to be engaged and meaningfully engaged, because I think also what the SDGs have failed to achieve all this time when it comes to communities is to make them relevant to communities. They seem like this big machinery for the elite that people don't really understand that it's what we do, it's everyday life. So asking or having tools that translate this high-level language into language that communities can can understand and can relate to is quite important. Now, the challenges again was I'm coming to the challenge. One of the biggest, I'll speak on the biggest challenge is how do we, like, the representation, right, of the communities. We want communities in, but how meaningful is meaningful representation? How inclusive should it be? You know, you have resource constraints. It doesn't take much too much resources going into communities, because how we did it was sort of village meetings. And you know, sampling, going and, you know, speaking to the village, council, and asking them to convene, you know, village meetings in these areas. But also, you know, even that requires resources. So how much of this engagement is truly representative? I think that is a question that we're also, you know, willing to learn. This was our first experience, but truly rewarding lessons. The next, you know, challenge would be, I think, in line with what everybody's saying, a seat at the table. If you look at these monitoring frameworks that are adopted in these VNRs, VSRs, VLRs, they don't have these community engagement tools. So how do we as a collective, as a partnership, influence to have these guidelines of you know, how to engage communities into the bigger frameworks? So I think that's also something that should be done when demanding a seat at the table, but also making sure that, you know, these guidelines calls for community participation. I think that's crucial. On the positive, I think one thing that we've managed to get is the government's commitment into replicating the exercise in the other municipalities. So kind of in between years, between now and the next VNR, there's going to be more VLRs happening in Tanzania. So that's a positive, but also the planning process. Our planning process uses the bottom-up approach, where you have village meetings up to the national budgets. So effective, maybe not, but this is something that we managed to influence, that now VLRs are going to be part of the monitoring frameworks at local government level. So I think I would stop there for now, and I would respond to questions as they come, or, you know, interventions as we proceed. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much, Reynald. I really appreciated this update, and also this idea of being able to then really carry it in between now and the next VNR to more and more communities. That sounds really great. So if anybody, you can use their either raise hand button under the, it's different places on different versions of, but if you want to raise your hand, oh, excuse me. Goodness gracious, excuse me. So if you have a question or a comment, please either raise your hand and I can call on you, or you can just unmute yourself and speak right up. Thank you, Millen. Anyone have any questions or comments? I think this is a big set of issues, and I think a lot of us are just taking them in, because it's really a call to action for each of us. How can we get a seat at the table? How can we fully engage a constituency and ensure that they're represented? Anyone? Okay, then. Well, let me mention. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah.
Please.
Yeah, just I wanted to mention that she actually presented very nice presentation, and she already mentioned what the Huairou Commission is doing. Just I wanted to mention that to improve the localization, local to local dialogue is very important. So we actually do it in our country, and with our grassroots women, we do it, and to connect the local councillor or local government, and it is very important to organize the local to local dialogue, so that the community will be improved and community will be resilient. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Yes, I really appreciate that comment, Kazi. I've seen the power of community to community visits. We had in one of the union parashats, one of the union chairperson visited to Kerala, and in Kenya, one of the leaders for citizen engagement in McQueen County, Zippy, who you've heard on these calls, she also traveled to Kerala. The state of Kerala in India is the answer to the question, what does democracy look like? The answer is it looks like Kerala, a place where people are really engaged with their local government, where the local government is resourced, has effective, accountable people working for it. And it completely changed his mindset forever of what's possible in community leadership. So, and I think your comment is very pertinent, Kazi. Anyone else? Any other comments? We have a wonderful set of them in the chat, and we'll be going through. Oh, Shri, yes, please go ahead.
Yeah, I read some of the comments on the chat, and one of them is like a comment about, how do we get communities recognize, and that national government sees them and include them, and that there many INGOs only or even donors only link the national level organization. So just sharing with you the experience from Huairou Commission. One is that we invest bringing with our limited resources, pushing and nominating our leaders to speak at international and regional spaces. And when they speak, they get the recognition from their government or a counterpart. And that's where also opportunities to link, because some of these grassroots leaders and community groups representative, they don't get to see and even to make appointment at the national level or even at with their local government, very hard to get. But when they're recognized and speak at these big spaces and forum, they get recognition. And that's where they start linking and getting recognized and included and given given a space at the table. So that's one strategy. And that's one of the things why we also invest in making sure building the capacity of our members to learn and to know critical UN or global policy that their government have endorsed, their government have adopted,
Yes.
2 or 3 that, I mean, of course, the SDG, and even before that, the MDGs, but also like the Sendai Framework for Action, which is very much about resilience, and now going into also the climate, right? Adaptation and things like that. The New Urban Agenda, which is very much, but some see it as a blueprint for the implementation of the SDG 11 and the interlinkages of the SDG. So that's one way. And we encourage and we push for also having a partnership, formalized partnership, between this local organization, our members, or sometimes the subset of their members, with at least the lowest level of government. For example, in the Philippines, they have the partnership with their barangay, because barangay is like the ward, in some in South Asian countries they call ward. In the Philippines they call barangay. In Indonesia they call it kampong. So that that's the lowest level of governance, government, and so that they are part of the governance system. So that's some example of how we our strategy. Yeah. Thank you for this opportunity.
Yes, absolutely, Shri. And I think that point is I have seen quite a few grassroots activists who are, as you would say, particularly articulate and determined to be seen and known, get invited by their national delegations to attend UN General Assemblies, or the Commission on the Status of Women, or the HLPF. We saw a number, sometimes an INGO can do that, like Save the Children and World Vision have brought young grassroots activists to these meetings, but also I've known local civil society leaders from Mexico get invited to their national delegation, from Uganda, from Bangladesh. So if you're, willing to make friends and be charming and speak your truth, it's not always a confrontation. There are a lot of governments that really would like to bring along citizen voices on their delegations. And that's a possibility and worth exploring in every country, particularly this year as we head into the SDG summit in September. Other questions or comments before we look at some future activities? Anyone? Okay, well, in that case, what I'm going to do is share my screen again and talk about some coming events. So as you can see, we have a call tomorrow that is only for community-based organizations. So small, local, no INGOs are attending this meeting. We had an earlier meeting with USAID as they were designing their system for measuring this commitment to have 50% of their funding going into community-led programming. They came up with some ideas for how to measure that. MCLD members gave a lot of input. 2/3 of all the input they got came from MCLD community-based organizations. And the deal was we would only organize that meeting if they would come back and close the loop and report on how that went. So that call is tomorrow at 9 a.m. Eastern time. The next peer leadership development calls, these are monthly calls, all are welcome. Anne, do you want to say anything particular about the next one coming up?
Thanks for this chance. Just so everybody knows, we have monthly leadership calls where we talk about issues that relate to leadership from a community-led development point of view. The last few calls we talked about localization and had really a rich discussion around that. Localization from the local point of view, which looks a little different than localization from the top-down point of view. And before that, we were talking about comparing worldviews of Western worldviews versus various indigenous worldviews and other worldviews. And that was also an extremely rich conversation. So I can't remember exactly what our next topic is, but anyone who would like to join those calls, we would love to have you. Please email me at ann@mcld.org. I will put that in the chat. Thank you.
Fabulous. And let me mention one other call that we've begun having weekly on Mondays for people who are devoting a major portion of their time to setting up the movement in their own country, or even their own part of the country. We're doing calls like that. And I saw several people from countries that aren't yet organized with movement associations. So if you write me, john@mcld.org, I can let you know about those. Anne also has a growing amount of materials for how to do that. We have a growing toolkit on our website for that. Our next monthly call, that is, we have these calls, the call that you're on today. Those happen the last Wednesday of every month. And the next one will be as we head into the UN summit, what's happening in each of our countries, how we're getting ready for it, what we're planning to do in partnership with other networks. I know this Local 2030 network, Catalyst 2030, there's a lot of networks that MCLD is part of or in regular communication with. So we'll be able to hear what's heading into this big halftime show in September at the SDGs summit. So I'm going to stop sharing. And one of the points that I was particularly struck by today that Sri made was she really emphasized essentially the moral obligation that we as networks need to link up with other networks. And I think it was you, Anne, who mentioned that sort of one of the keystones or indicators of a successful movement is its linkages with other movements. And that I realize we haven't talked nearly enough about that. But there are a number of networks in different countries and global networks that MCLD is connected with. And so in our next newsletter, I'll include a little bit about that. I think it would be useful I know some of the national associations are also, I know in Benin, for instance, that they work very closely with a very large civil society network in Benin. So being able to highlight that feature, and Sri, I'll count on you to tell me who I should coordinate with to make sure that MCLD and Huairou are well connected and are able to strategize joint strategies. We've had great support from UCLG in the past. UCLG, United Cities and Local Governments, is the network of local governments basically in the world. It's very big, and it hosted this local day that was at the HLPF. So we're not alone in this, just to say. And I think one way to really keep raising the profile of local communities is to make sure that we're synergizing with each other in all these networks. So usually I do want to mention those of you who are used to hearing my colleagues, Gunjan and Sarah, speak on these calls. They are away today and not able to be here. Do want to hear from any of the National Association leaders who are on the call who want to share any updates on what's happening in their national associations. I don't see the list of all participants in front of me, but I know Steve was with us. If you want to share updates of what's happening in your country, this would be a great time to do it. Pascal, I see, is on the call. Don't know. My friend Isatu Jallo is on the call. Wow, that's wonderful, Isatu.
Sure, John. Maybe I could just share a quick one. Yeah. I think as you've mentioned, in Kenya, we partnered with the county government called Makueni County to establish the School for Community-Led Development. And this is targeting development partners, civil society organizations, and government officials. And the aim is to provide, strengthen capacity of different actors in those sectors on various issues that touch on community-led development. And so currently we have the first cohort that's going on, and this is government officials that have been trained on how best they can integrate community-led approaches in designing, implementing, and also evaluating development projects within their counties. And so we have the next cohort coming up in a couple of weeks. I think that's pretty much it, John.
That's great.
Maybe any other person who might be willing to participate in our next intake, we could also share when that time comes, because we do these trainings virtually. So you can join anywhere.
Yes, wonderful. Sierra Leone, Lassie, what say you?
Yes, thank you, John, and everyone for being in this meeting. Yeah, for us, Sierra Leone, I think we are also doing well. Currently, as you heard from us last month, we embarked on the peace education for the free and fair election, which was very successful for us. Of course, after the election, some of our members are still on the post-election education, like Anne-Marie. So those, she's not actually in the meeting today, but she's well engaged for continue on the post-election campaign about peace education. And we continue to amplify the movement, and that particular exercise also helped us to gain the public awareness about the MCLD, and as a result, we are getting increased interest from other members, like the CBOs and other national NGOs, to join the movement. So it's a very good opportunity for us that we are able to tap into. Yeah, thank you.
Great, wonderful. Thank you, Lassie. Any other national associations? Okay, I think then that's it. I will mention, so last month, our call was on locally led adaptation, and the principles for locally led adaptation was presented by Stephanie Tai from World Resource Institute. They have a community of practice, so they have their own network of people working on locally led adaptation. And I was able to join their meeting and present the movement to them, and that has led to a whole bunch of connections since then. So I know that it is our express intention that we are able to leverage the growing interest in locally led climate adaptation to get resources into communities for their resilience activities. And so we're going to pursue that one very actively, and we'll keep you informed as how that turns out. If there's nothing else from anybody, I will invite everyone to unmute and leave on their cameras, and then we can all say goodbye.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
So much.
So good to see you today. Thank you for everything.
Bye.
Goodbye.
Thanks.
Goodbye, everyone.
Bye.
Goodbye.
Bye-bye.
See you soon.
Bye.
Goodbye. Goodbye, everyone.
Okay, goodbye.
Thank you.